All right, good morning, everybody. Wow, this is loud. Sound loud. So welcome to our session on knowledge work in Office 365. My name is Eric Anderson. I'm from the O365 engineering group, and I'm joined with Leanna Robb here, who will come up in a little bit and show us some cool stuff. But we're from a group in Office called Workplace Analytics, and it's a relatively new group in Microsoft. And so we're excited today to talk to you about two things. One is, what is workplace analytics and why we think it's really important and really interesting, especially for this community, which is the analyst community. We think there's some really big things we can do with workplace analytics, and we'll talk a lot about that. And then the second is the power that we have when we combine multiple Office 365 tools. So specifically, we're going to talk about workplace analytics and Power BI and the value that we have seen when we bring these together and work with customers using them at the same time. But there's a number of different things that you could do in a similar way. So we hope you walk out of today with excited about the potential we have around some of the data that we maybe don't use and take advantage of, but also how do we bring these different products that we have together to bring value to your companies and to your customers. So we're going to start off by talking about the knowledge worker. So how many people are really relatively familiar with this term, knowledge worker? Okay, good number of you. That's good. So when we say knowledge worker, we mean people who do non-repetitive cognitive work. So that's probably most of us in this room. And more, the bulk of companies are being made up of people that we would call knowledge workers. And we think these people are really interesting for two reasons. So the first is what you see on this chart. This chart shows about the last 30 years or so of workers in the US. And it essentially shows, when you look at the blue and the green lines, a lot of types of work are either remaining flat or even starting to decline, while knowledge workers have had this steady growth in the US in terms of jobs. So we have a set of workers that's growing. These workers are becoming the bulk of the employees at a company and becoming the biggest investment that companies have. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you look at these types of work, if you look at the green and blue lines, so people who do routine things, whether it's manufacturing workers, maybe call center workers, they're typically very well instrumented. And so if you go to a manufacturing company and you talk to an operations manager and you say, hey, I want to know what's going on at station 13 on line 2, they can probably tell you in the last 5 minutes how many widgets have gone through that station, the person that's working there, what's their productivity for the day, how much it costs them to actually perform those tasks, and how efficient they are, so how many rejects or defects they've been producing throughout that day. But when you talk about that red line, the knowledge workers, we think it's kind of a big black box. Like, it's really hard to define what people are doing, how to measure those people. How do we know that big investment we have in these people, are we getting what we want to get out of those people? And so we have this idea that knowledge workers tend to work with a specific set of tools, even though they're not doing things in a repetitive way. And we can start to capture information from those tools to help us define what it is that they're actually doing. So with Office 365, we have a big set of data that underlies everything that happens. So how many of you guys use email or calendar every single day? Right? I'd be surprised if a hand didn't go up. When you use tools like that, you leave behind this digital exhaust, right? Like these digital footprints that say, hey, here's kind of what's going on behind the scenes. And similarly with all these other things up here, whether it's instant messenger, whether it's shared documents that you work collaboratively with others on, all of these leave behind data that we think we can use to start to figure out what is it that knowledge workers are actually doing. How are they working? How are they getting things done? Which groups are doing things better than others? And so we want you to think about this as a huge opportunity for you to start to think about how do we take advantage of those workers and help them do their jobs better. I'm going to play a quick video here to kind of introduce some of these concepts and ideas.
knowledge work are not very well quantified and not very well understood, and therefore it's hard to say what good is. We know good when we see it, but it's very hard to quantify what good is. And what we can do with workplace analytics is start to understand some of the building blocks that go into a knowledge worker's day.
Workplace analytics is a solution that pulls data from your collaboration systems, email, calendar, instant message, etc., turns them into a set of behavioral metrics to find patterns of success, and then they can be shared out through Office 365 applications to help people be more effective at their jobs.
What we're unlocking with workplace analytics is the idea of digital exhaust, which is the data that comes naturally off of our everyday work that we can then use to understand what's going on in an organization.
That digital exhaust actually provides a very granular fact base around who I interacted with, how much time I spent with each person, and when you roll that up at an organizational level, you suddenly have incredible rich fact base of behaviors across an organization.
You can use workplace analytics to answer questions like, what are the best people in this organization, the people who are most satisfied and most productive? What is the kind of pattern that they work in, and what kind of rhythm seems to be predicting that outcome of success or happiness?
It can be used specifically to solve problems like collaboration overload, manager effectiveness, sales productivity, and many other problems that a company may face.
It's being used by dozens and dozens of companies, many of them some of the biggest and most successful companies in the world. They're using it to drive higher employee engagement scores, they're using it to design better office spaces. There's just new things coming in every day.
Workplace analytics as a solution has been designed to meet the privacy and security needs of organizations. The objective here is not to understand the activities of any one individual. The objective here is to understand the big trends that are happening in a business.
This data actually finds us patterns that are true across different countries and different industries and different functions in the organization. We're finding out something really foundational about how people work.
Workplace analytics is going to change the way we think about productivity.
It's a solution that provides insight and visibility into how your organization actually operates, and then tools to help you tailor it to the specific problems you're trying to solve.
It's not going back to the podium. Oh, here we go. All right, we got it. Sorry about that. Okay, so as you saw in the video there, what we're doing is we're taking all of this data and we're starting to put it in a way that's really flexible to use. If you think about collaboration data, it's a really broad data set used in a number of different scenarios. But by putting it into a way that an analyst can take it and be really customized and flexible with how they get at that data, what are they trying to look for in that data, what are they trying to search for, and then making it so that we can combine that data with other data sets that you can start to make these cause and effect relationships. So if you think about all of this collaboration as an input, what does that look like, and what's its impact on an output? Maybe something like the productivity of a sales force or the satisfaction of employees with their workplace. So building these things together, we're starting to get an idea that this tool can be really powerful. And we've seen it effective in a number of different scenarios, ranging from really broad, something we call collaboration overload, which is something where you just look at all of the emails you get and all the meetings you get, and people just start to feel overwhelmed with how do I deal with all of this that comes at me every single day, to something a lot more specific, like, hey, we want to look at our sales team, we want to understand how they actually work. What are the things that our top sellers do that are different than the rest of our sellers, and how do we start to understand those so we can change the way our whole organization works. So we can be specific, we can be broad, and we've seen success in both ways. So a little bit about how we're actually pulling this together and doing something with it. Today what we're doing is we're pulling metadata from email and calendar. So that's nothing that has to do with what's in the email. It's more who it's sent to, when was it sent, for meetings. What's the subject of that meeting? Who are the attendees? What was how did they respond to that? Did they accept it? Did they decline it? We're putting that data together and making it anonymous. And then we're going through and we're cleaning out stuff that's non-business related. So we don't care about if Eric went and had on his calendar to go walk his dog in the evening. We don't want that in our data set, so we're cleaning all of that stuff out. And then we're adding to it contextual data to make it meaningful. So things about the organization, so job titles, levels, where people are located, how long they've been in the company, manager kind of hierarchy, manager-employee relationship, so you understand where people sit in a company. And that can help us start to build a picture like this social graph that you see at the bottom there that shows how a company actually works together. So not how it's defined to work together, not what the org structure is, but how people are really actually working within that company. And then we calculate a bunch of KPIs from that data. And we generally bucket these in these groups. So the first is, how do we work with people outside of our company? What's the network size? How much do we work with those people? And then we can do the same thing inside the company, looking at employees, and on average, do they work mainly within their organization? Do they work across organizations? How much time do they spend in meetings? How much time do they spend doing email? Do they do that stuff during business hours or after business hours? And then we think the manager and employee relationship is one of the most important things that a company can look at in terms of how do we make our employees better. And so we look at a bunch of different relationships and activities around that relationship, things like the average manager, how much time do they spend one-on-one with their direct employees? How much exposure up in an organization do they give to their employees, things like that. And then we can also look at what's the investment that people are making from a time standpoint around certain business processes. So we can look at the subject of mails and meetings to understand, hey, how much time are we spending collaborating around a topic like budget planning or something like that. And you can start to see some really interesting results when you actually look at all of the time invested around a certain topic. So all of this we think is really interesting, really exciting. We're getting this real unique data set that we think can be used in a lot of different ways. And we're starting to give it to analysts so that they have the opportunity to analyze that data. But I think, as a lot of you probably recognize, that's only step one. And to really do something with this data, we have to be able to analyze it in a very flexible way. But we also need to be able to take that data and make it meaningful for somebody. So we need to figure out how can we take all of this and be able to tell a story and make it so that people can connect to it and be interested and care about it. And then use that to then provide ways that you can use the data to drive action. And that's where we see this combination of tools like Power BI and Workplace Analytics, that you bring those two things together, we can actually start to drive change. So Workplace Analytics gives us this huge data set. We've got all these KPIs. We've got ways to actually look at that data in many different slices and start to get an idea of where we might want to focus to drive action. But then we can go put that into Power BI, and all of a sudden we have a whole different way that we can use that data. We can be much more flexible. We can combine it with other data sets so that we can start to understand this as a driver to outputs. And we can also make that much more usable in the way that we give it and broadcast it out to different people. And you'll see some examples of how we've done that in a way that actually drives people to change their behavior based on data versus just getting a data set that they're actually just looking that's a broad data set for a whole company. And so these two things together, we think, are really powerful in the way that we can actually change behaviors from it. So we're going to take you through a couple of stories about how we've done this. We've grabbed two scenarios, and we're going to walk through those scenarios. I'm going to start with workspace planning. And workspace planning is an interesting one because when you think about large companies, there's actually a lot of investment that companies have in workspace planning. Yet they don't always have the data that they need to make the decisions that they want to in a data-driven way. So we started actually working with Microsoft's real estate team in this. And Microsoft's campus here in the Puget Sound is really complex. There's actually 115 different buildings in Puget Sound. 84 of them are on our main campus, which is on the east side in Redmond. And then the rest of them are spread out kind of around Seattle, Bellevue, Issaquah, kind of the general area. But the way that these buildings are set up, there's travel time associated with getting between them. And so there's a team that's dedicated to kind of what's the strategy of this site in terms of where people sit. And so we started talking with this group, and we started to ask them, hey, what do you actually use to drive your decisions when it comes to workplace strategy? And they said, well, they try to get data, but they really struggle. And so historically what they've used is they've used two data sources for data that informs them on decisions around which teams should be in which buildings. So one is survey data. So they'll go out and ask teams, like, who do you spend your time working with? And they'll get feedback. And the other is they've tried more and more to use badge swipe data, which is pretty common these days. People, go capture the data from buildings when people scan in and out of them. But at Microsoft, they found that data was really unreliable because of the way our campus is set up. And that's that about every third building has a cafeteria in it. So they looked at badge swipe data. They got all this noise from people swiping in to go eat. And so they couldn't actually distinguish, were people going to those buildings because they were working with people in those buildings, or they're just going to visit the coffee stand or the cafeteria or whatnot. So they said it would really be helpful if they had a better set of data that would help them plan where people sit in buildings. So we said, hey, well, we've got this new data set we've been working in workplace analytics, and we can actually quantify by organization how much time an organization is spending with another organization and how they're actually doing that. Are they doing that in person in meetings, or are they doing that through email? And so we pulled this data and handed it over to the real estate team. And they took that and they put it in Power BI and combined it with all of the data they have around our buildings on campus. So they built it's a pretty basic Power BI dashboard, but it's really powerful for them to quickly make decisions and have discussions with different organizations. So you'll see they have kind of population of a bunch of organizations here on the left. And then this map on the left, this is actually where they sit in the different buildings. So this is kind of main Microsoft campus over in this area where you can see there's this big cluster of people sitting in a bunch of different buildings. There's a few buildings in downtown Bellevue that Microsoft has a bunch of people at. And so this is kind of the current state of where people are. And then this map on the right is the top groups they collaborate with and where they sit. And then on the top, you can see kind of the breakout of those groups, what % of time they spend with those groups, and then the breakout of email and meetings. And so this gives kind of a pretty powerful set of data that they can quickly look at different organizations. And so if you look at the top organization from a person standpoint on there, you can start to see, if we look at main campus, they're basically in about 5 buildings. They're in main campus. They have some people over here in Bellevue. But when you compare that with who they work with, it actually looks like, hey, maybe it's in not that bad a shape. There's a bunch of people here that look to be kind of in the same place here. Maybe this building's kind of unique. I don't see anyone over here. But if you drill down further, at the building level, you can start to see here the bulk of the people sit in building 31. A couple of people spread out in these other buildings here. And the bulk of the people they work with are in building 32, which is right next door. That's probably not a big deal. But you've got these other big groups of people in building 35 and this building down here. And so you can start to say, well, geez, does that really impact the ability of these two teams to work together? And should we make a change based on this? Should we try and figure out how do we bring these teams more closely related from a physical location standpoint, and see if we need to do something about this distance between these organizations? So from the real estate team's perspective, they had never had the ability to take reliable data and bring it together in a way that they could kind of basically walk around with this to their customers, which are all the different leaders in Microsoft, and say, hey, here, now I have real data that shows here's where your team is, here's the people that they work with, here's how they collaborate with them. They meet in person, they meet via email, and here's how that relates to the physical location, and we can start to drive changes based on that. So really powerful for them. They use this. They're using this now with all of their site strategy planning and using this to make decisions on where people sit in Microsoft. All right, so I'm going to pass it to Leanna, who's going to come up and walk you through a sales scenario.
Okay.
How are we doing on time?
Okay. My name is Leanna Robb. I'm a program manager on the Workplace Analytics team, and I'm going to walk you guys through another use case where we did a top performer analysis with the sales team at Microsoft. And I'll show you how we were able to use behavioral data from Workplace Analytics along with outcome data that's commonly associated with salespeople to begin to pick out those characteristics that differentiate top-performing salespeople from everyone else. So when we started this analysis, we were aiming to answer the question, what workplace behaviors differentiate top performers from their peers? And being able to answer that question would have been great in its own right, but what makes it even more powerful is that we knew that if we could answer this question, we could also enable those salespeople to make changes and be better sellers. So with that in mind, our three main goals for this study were to gain visibility into the behaviors of sellers, enable coaching of sellers that were not top performers, and provide individual level dashboards to enable sellers to make changes themselves in their own schedules. So to begin this analysis, the first thing we had to do is define what top performance was. We did this by talking to a number of sales leaders, and we determined that it was a combination of performance, talent, and consistent year-over-year rewards. With those in mind, we were able to identify top performers by region and then take a deeper look into what behaviors and relationships they had that were very different from their peers. Once we defined those, we were able to narrow down a list of key metrics that we felt most differentiated those top performers. And with those in mind, we were able to make an individual level dashboard using Power BI that features those metrics and enables salespeople to track them over time and compare themselves, their own performance, to that of their peers. And so with that, we'll jump into a demo. I don't need audio, but it's yeah. There we go. Okay, great. Okay, so this is, the data here is meant to be representative of what an individual salesperson would see. So it's not actual real data, but this would be made for an individual. We used a feature in Power BI called row-level security that enabled us to deliver the same UX to a number of different salespeople, but each of them saw a personalized and private view of their own data. So there's three components to this dashboard. The yellow lines represent the top performer benchmark, which is an average of the values for top performers. The gray lines and bars represent all other peers, so people who are not top performers. And the blue lines and bars represent the individual. So this enables them to directly compare their performance to their peers over time. One of the main metrics that we look at is internal network size and the amount of time that salespeople spend collaborating with people internally. And what we saw confirmed a previously held belief that internal relationships were just as important as external relationships for salespeople, making sure they know the right people to answer their questions and get the job done. We also saw that they consistently spent more time with people in higher levels, and not only at and we didn't just stop there, but we also looked at what teams those people in higher levels were on. And so we noticed that top performers also spent more time with customer-facing roles like sales support. And even if the salesperson wasn't directly interfacing with the customer, interfacing with these other customer-facing roles was also super important. So looking at this area over here where we have hours with sales support and this bar graph down here, these can actually be used almost as a proxy for customer time. And so all of the data here in this dashboard is just using metadata from Exchange, basic HR data, and the Workplace Analytics tool. Where we can begin to add even more color to the customer relationship story is if we add in CRM data. So moving on to the next tab. This is all about external relationships. So on this page, we enable the seller to look at how much time they're spending with customers over time and how many different customers they're contacting each week. We added the map in the table in anticipation of questions that we expected to receive from sellers. As soon as they're able to see how much time they're supposedly spending with customers, they're going to want to know who those customers are. And so using CRM data, we're able to pull in the names of the customers, the last time that they were contacted, and how much time is spent with each of them. And this page is really great because it actually provides some of the most actionable takeaways for the seller. They're able to see specifically which customers they might want to spend more time with, which ones they need to reach out to, and make sure that they're not losing track of any relationships and that they're keeping up to date with everyone. So we update this monthly so that our sellers are able to see a monthly refresh of insights and continue to track their performance over time. And it's been a great opportunity for them to familiarize themselves with Power BI and with Workplace Analytics, and to also be better sellers for Microsoft who are able to make better decisions about how they spend their time and use their calendars. So, okay. I kind of blew through that, but that was it. So there's tons of data available in Office 365, and we're just beginning to dive into more and more use cases of how Workplace Analytics can drive new visibility into the life of the knowledge worker. And Power BI has been such a great tool for us to begin to visualize these insights and enable both teams and individuals to take them and take action based on data that they didn't even know about themselves. And that's it. If you have any questions, feel free.
Yeah, do we need to use the mic for questions, or they can just yell it out, right? Yeah.
So, obviously, you're talking about mostly products, I think, in the sales one, but do you consider it from a project perspective, project management? I could see this very well applying to individual project managers working with their team on, say, people who have to deliver, like, say, like a building or something over the long term. So have you all considered any of those use cases or seen any of that?
Yeah. You want me to answer?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we have. So, so we've used this data in a number of use cases. We've been using the data for a few years now. And with project management, similarly to any team collaboration, as long as we can associate people to a project, we're able to see kind of how those people interact. And so sometimes that can be a little tricky depending on how companies do that, because we're not monitoring individuals, so people have to be associated with that project to see how that group is working. But we've seen that very successful in companies that do have very kind of formalized ways that they manage projects, and sometimes that's an industry thing. Like some industries, like construction industries, everything is project-based. You know, in a tech company, if it's a new product, it's very project-based, and we can see that. And you can start to see what's the impact on their ability to get things to market fast, what's the impact on their ability to have like a bunch of iterations based upon how they collaborate. So we've absolutely seen that around project management space as well. Yep.
So could you use Office 365 groups as like a filtering mechanism to show who your peer group would be?
We could. So we are currently not. So currently we're not using groups, but our plan is, since it's a new product, we have all sorts of aspirations, right? And one of them is using information like groups to help us identify that. Yep. Yep.
How do we get access to this anonymized data set?
Yeah, so it's a new product coming out later this year. It will be a SKU that people can buy as an add-on to our enterprise offerings. And so you can you essentially buy access to a tool that gives you the ability to look at that data. It helps visualize the data as well as has very flexible query capabilities in that tool, so you can get at the data and then you can do whatever you want with that beyond there.
Well, I was referring specifically to some of the anonymized data sets that you showed us here today. Is that something we can play with ourselves or get access to?
So we can't give the data out because it's customers' data, but we'll potentially have like training data sets as part of our. If you buy the product, we have a training and onboarding motion that will have training data sets people can play with.
Is that typically data that an enterprise would have on their own from Office 365? Or my own company's data would.
How long do you need to build up that data, basically?
Yeah, so the data's there. I mean, every company that uses Exchange today or Office 365, the data is there. The hard thing is getting at that data and cleaning the data. So that's where, with Workplace Analytics, we've figured out how to kind of go through and get out the non-business related stuff. But yes, the data's there. So that's the nice thing. You turn it on, you can actually look back as far as you want to look in the data. You don't need to turn it on for a year before you have like a decent set of data.
Does it have to be anonymous if it were just your org, if you had Workplace Analytics for your company?
Yep, so we make it anonymous always as part of our privacy agreements in O365. And we have a minimum group size, so when we display data back out, we have minimum group size settings that an organization can customize based upon their own privacy settings that they have in their company.
So within a company, you could break it down into divide it into different groups, they'll be anonymous.
Yep. Yep.
Would you suggest going forward with a smaller, everything we do is always pushed out in pilot versus, okay, we're just going to change our whole org right now. So from like a smaller size internal IT that kind of gets the brunt of, yeah, you guys are the guinea pigs right now. Sorry, we're going to do this, but that's kind of the way we focus. Would that be something here, or would you be looking for bigger sets?
Yeah, when we work with customers with this data, it works better if you have a bigger sets because you're trying to get this. It's behavioral data, so you can't. The bigger data set you have, you see better trends. And so we typically look at like 5,000 employees is like a really nice data set. We've done it with much smaller than that too, but that's a really like optimum number is around 5,000 employees. And you get really good data out of that.
How does the organization respond to this new set of analytics? So what's the response you get from the organization that says, hey, we're turning on Workplace Analytics?
Yeah, so it's really actually pretty positive, but the caveat to that is a company has to actually roll this out in the right way. So we recommend that there's actually transparency about it and actually explaining what it is, how it's being used, what the data is, so people aren't creeped out about it, thinking, hey, we're looking into everything that people are doing, because that's not really what we're doing, and that's not the intent of it. And so when people do that, it's actually been the response has been very positive, especially when it gets to the level where people are getting kind of individualized things that they can use to take action, because everyone really wants to do their job better. So when it gets down to that personal level, and we have a personal product too that some of you may be familiar with called My Analytics, that really is like your personalized dashboard that tells you how you spend your time. And so the more that employees see how it's impacting them, the more receptive they are to this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would just add, with the internal team that we created that dashboard for, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and they were so excited to see their data quantified like that, and especially for sellers being able to see their CRM data like that, because it actually inspired them to have better data hygiene with their CRM data, because our dashboard can only be as accurate as the CRM data is going into it. And so it's been hugely helpful for their team. And I think it's all about communicating that value of, like, we're going to look at this data, but you get something out of it too. You all have a better time at work because of what we can learn about it.
Do you need to tag emails or calendar with like hashtag budget or something, or how do you know that they're talking about the budget?
Yeah, so when we associate time to like a business process or a certain set of activities, you can do text searching in the subject lines, and that's how we typically do that. And usually you can, if it's something that's kind of a fairly standardized thing in a company, usually you can find pretty good data about it. We have had companies that have started tagging things because they want to see data around something. Then you just have to, you have to build that up over a little bit of time if it hadn't been done in the past. But we have absolutely seen companies kind of change behaviors to do that. And usually that'll be, at an organization or a team level, they'll say, hey, we really are interested in how much time we're spending doing these things. As a team, let's agree we're all going to start changing our behavior and how we tag meetings and email so that we can actually get data about it on the back end. Yep.
Have you tried to visualize processes with this data set?
We have, yep, and it kind of goes back to that same thing. If those processes are tagged or we can identify them, then we have the timestamp data. And so you can actually see, it's really interesting if you plot this stuff over time, you can see peaks and spikes, peaks and valleys in the time investment from resources around a certain process. We did a project with a big company that had a regular kind of planning process that was supposed to be executed the third week of every month. And they were really interested in what was the time investment in the other weeks where they were not supposed to be spending any time on it. And the reality was they had a spike in the first week, and then it went down a little bit in the second week, and then a big spike in the third week, down in the fourth week, and back up in the first week. Because the people who were responsible for executing in that third week, they had their teams doing a bunch of work in the first week to get ready for it. And so it was something that was almost like this concept of the hidden factory, the work that's happening that people don't know that's happening because they can't see it. It shows up when you look at email and meetings, which is really the time investment. Yep.
So I was just piggybacking on that. Like chats have to be much more difficult if you're using, like we use Skype for Business. And so if you go directly from an email, obviously you get a chain. But if I just all of a sudden bring up, got a sec, that kind of thing like that. And maybe one of the behaviors we're trying to drive is to move people into teams right now, which would obviously make that a lot more quantifiable, I think. But from a chat perspective, how are you capturing that data?
Yep, so we don't capture chat as of right now. It's on our roadmap, so we will. But it will be interesting when we start to see that data, because it is less formal, right? So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. But yeah, right now we just have, for our launch later this year, we have mail and calendar. Yep.
Will this be available in the same timeline for Government Cloud? I mean, will that, I don't know if there's any challenges that need to be, or
yeah.
specs that
do you know the answer to that, Nate?
The Government Cloud as well for this.
Yeah, I don't know the answer specifically. I mean, from a technology standpoint, it's all the same.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's anything special from a public sector standpoint.
Yeah, I just know
I'm not sure.
The teams, like that's not approved for Government Cloud until I think the end of this year. So I just wasn't sure if any of that.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any limitations, but we can certainly follow up if you have an interest in that. Yeah. Other questions? Great. Well, thanks for coming and listening. Hope you walk away excited about a new opportunity here with a new data set. Yep.